Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties episode 20. My name's Lee, I'm from Western Australia. This week I'm joined by Vickers from Canberra
Hey, hey.
and Tim from Victoria.
Howdy.
Now, this week we're going to be talking about kind of issues of race that have been going on in Australia in the last week or so. So we've got two sort of general topics to talk about. We're going to be talking about the Adam Goodes AFL booing saga, and we're going to and we're going to talk about the some of the what's going on with the proposed changes to the Constitution regarding race and preambles and whatnot. So, but we'll start off with Adam Goodes. Tim, do you just want to quickly go into what is going on with Adam Goodes and what the deal with all of this is? Oh no, he's dropped out completely. That's unfortunate. Well, how about I go into it?
Yeah.
Oh, is Tim back?
Sorry, because I'm an NRL dude.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
sorry, I'm a
unfortunate for you.
total Sydney sider here.
Okay.
And which is bad because Adam Goodes is technically a Sydney Swan, right? And
Yes.
let me be perfectly honest. I probably would boo Adam Goodes, but that's just because I hate AFL.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair enough. That would make you racist.
Apparently.
So, for the benefit of those who are not from Australia, so Adam Goodes is a player for the Sydney Swans Australian Football League team. He's an Aboriginal man, and he's been subject to a lot of booing from opposition fans over the recent few weeks. And there's just been,
some of the reasons actually are just like full blown racist, right?
Yeah.
Like some of them, like for example, they go like, "Oh, he's pretending to chuck a spear," and I'm sitting there going like, "And."
Yeah.
How, like, it's just like, oh, it's like Aboriginal culture, like, it's not Aboriginal culture or something like that, or all this other sorts of bullshit. I've heard all sorts of weird reasons for why that's a bad thing. I'm just there going like, I don't understand why someone being part of their so proud of their cultural heritage is worthy of being booed. In fact, if you're booing someone for wanting to get in touch with their cultural heritage, I'd say you're probably a racist, right? And it's just this is coming from the fact I'm like sitting there going like, okay, people have a culture, right? And if you're saying that them, representing that culture or coming into whatever appreciation of it is somehow offensive to you, then yes, you're racist. Like there's no other way around it. So those particular that particular reason to me smacks of racism. However, I've heard other people say like, oh, it's because of that girl or something like that.
So there was a situation where a 13-year-old girl at a game about a year and a half ago called him an ape, and he heard it and he pointed her out, and then security kicked her out of the stadium. And she said that she didn't realize there was racial connotations with that, and. It's part of, I don't have a strong opinion.
Yeah,
Shockingly, I don't have a strong opinion on this particular issue. I guess, there's part of me that thinks, why is it him specifically that is attracting all this attention? Because there's like 70 odd Aboriginal players within the AFL, and he seems to be the only one who's getting booed a lot. So I guess I wonder, why specifically him? Like,
because as far as I can tell, because he's become a symbol. So
yeah, I think that's what it's become about.
Yeah, so. And this is another thing. Like someone goes like, well, there's only one player getting booed, right? None of the other Aboriginal players are getting booed. Therefore, it's not racist. And I said, well, actually, not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
It's about why you're booing him. It's not number of Aboriginal players. Like that's got nothing to do with it, right? Like and so one of the things is they said, like particularly coming back to this little girl's incident, they go like, oh, he said she's the face of racism, right? And then I went there going like, okay, in what context, right?
Fair.
And sorry, Tim. Let me just finish this. So, and when I read the context of that claim, I'm like sitting there going like, there was this little girl making ape noises and da 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 da. And that my heart shattered at that point, and he goes like, "This is the face of racism." And he goes on to say, someone who doesn't know that they're doing anything racist. And I'm sitting there going, you know what? And given the full context of that statement, I think I agree with Goodes, right? Like it's not saying this little girl is the face of racism, as in like this is the epitome of racism. It's that her not knowing that what she was doing was racist, is the face of racism. That makes perfect sense. And this is something that Andrew Bolt basically, went like, oh, this is the face of racism, and then, kind of just said, oh, he's saying all little white girls are racists. and I'm just sitting there going like, what the fuck is wrong with you, Bolt?
Well, I mean, I guess you could. I'm not saying I'm not mounting this argument, but you could say that we've actually. Yeah, I'm even reluctant to say because it sounds a bit dumb even coming out of my mouth. But you could say that she didn't realize because we've so far removed from that particular era of kind of racism within Australian culture. I don't know if I'd buy that, but I mean, it's not totally unreasonable to say that that we've moved to a point in time where it'd be. Racism is so unwelcome within Australian culture that it's hard to sort of, maybe it's possible you could say she doesn't know because that's just not part of what it means to be racist anymore. I don't know. I mean, it's really, I don't know. I guess, like, I think definitely there is some racism that is motivating this bullying, as there, some people just don't like black people, and that's just the reality. I think maybe, I think it was more probably to do with the symbolism, and I think, like, let's be frank, some white people find the concept of being called a racist incredibly antagonistic. So why they may not like black people, they may also just not like being called racist. So it could be that as well. That's why he's getting all this booing, and not others.
The booing really started this season, and I'm probably going to take a contrary view to the two of you, but it didn't start after the 13-year-old girl incident. It started to build up when he during his time as Australian of the Year, and I'm going to get into a culture war area here, when he really took on the black armband view of Australian history, like saying Australia was invaded and the land was taken from the Aborigines and the people were murdered, and saying that Australia was a country built on a lot of racist things, and Australians, even though I don't believe Australians
is this connection guy
on the whole racist, but they really just sorry?
Tim, I think your internet connection's slowly dying again. Oh dear. Alright, well, we'll just have to move on without Tim. Hopefully he can...
Yeah, sorry guys.
Okay.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. Alright, so anyway, let's, what were we talking about? Okay, so, I mean, I think what this has become about the culture war and, just general conservative versus left-wing, like progressive kind of talking points and all that sort of stuff. So, I guess it's unfortunate that these things always get dragged into that particular debate. And, yeah. Well, let's maybe move on. With me, Vickers, can you hear me?
Yes, okay, I can.
So maybe let's move on to the talk of the reconciliation debate, the preamble and stuff. Yeah, it's a bit bigger topic. How about you explain the basic idea behind it, what's being pushed while I fix up the picture, our video aspect.
So what, like, you want me to explain what the referendum's about?
Yes.
So okay, so there's a campaign called Recognise, which is about putting the Aboriginals. So what they say, the game that they talk about is that you can use. Is that they want to put Aboriginals into the preamble of the Constitution to officially recognise them as Australia's first people. Now, the more conservative side has flusterings between the argument of basically they point to Mungo Man and go, oh look, there were people that weren't related to Aboriginals that were here before the Aboriginals and possibly got wiped out. That's what some conservative columnists have put out. I think particularly Bolt is a fan of this argument. And on the other
David
side,
Reinhold said that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, he did. But I remember someone actually doing the what was it again? I can't remember what it was, but they sorry, the conversation thing. They actually did like an analysis, and they said they went like, oh, yes, Mongo Man was like a different person, sorry, different type of person, but they don't live here anymore, therefore you can't count them as Australia's first people. And I was just sitting there going like, wait, hang on. You've already stipulated that it's a Homo sapien, and they were here in Australia, and you've said that they're not related to the Aboriginals, and you're saying because the Aboriginals wiped them out, that they're no longer the first people. I'm just like, well, then if all the Brits had to do was wipe out the Aboriginal people, and there was no Indigenous
Yeah.
population here, which is why like that entire argument just smacked of. I just sat there and went. Face palmed and went, you know what?
Yeah.
Forget it. I don't care about.
I mean,
I'm not invested enough in this to actually care about who the first people here were.
Yeah. I think the better question, and to be fair to him, I think this is the one that Andrew Bolt brings up more often, is should we be putting race into the Constitution? Should we be? And I think there is an argument to say that
there's already
like,
race in the Constitution.
well,
There's
yes,
race in the
and it
Constitution.
should be removed. I mean, and he
Yeah.
would argue that should be taken out as well. As Noel Pearson and a bunch of other guys, they say that the race power should be taken out of the Constitution as well.
Correct. And
I think some of them say there should be the race power, for those who don't know, being that
Section 51 of the Constitution, which gives the power to the Parliament to make laws with respect to race.
Yeah. So I mean, I think everybody's in agreement that particular section of the Constitution should be removed. I mean, I guess I sort of think, well, if I don't think you necessarily need to be sorting out these sort of cultural things like in the Constitution. Like the preamble should actually be, well, there should be almost nothing in there. I mean,
well, the preamble is basically what I have lovingly called a love letter to the Queen.
Yeah.
Because
and to be fair, I'd be happy if they removed that as well. Like I don't think there's any need for a preamble. Like you just have nothing. You just have a constitution. It doesn't it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't help any Aboriginal people to have it in the preamble. And I think there is an argument to also be said that if you put something in the preamble, that doesn't mean a judge later on doesn't decide to start making decisions based on the preamble. So I think it is. Not completely honest.
It is actually, not only is it actually honest, I think it's a very dishonest campaign by people who say the preamble doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Because it does. So, for example, the secession movement that's big in West Australia, one of the reasons they can't get it off the ground is because the Constitution specifically says that the Federation is indissoluble.
Yeah.
Right? Word is there in the preamble. Right? So, as far as our Constitution says, our federation can never be dissolved.
Yep.
Unlike America, where the question of nullification of states has always been an issue, the Australian founding fathers deliberately said you cannot dissolve this federation. Once put together, that's it.
Though it doesn't actually mention Western Australia, so in some ways it doesn't really matter. But
It doesn't really
that's neither
apply
here nor
to
there.
Western
But that is a fair point. And also,
Yeah.
I think in New Zealand they added stuff to the preamble, and then human rights. In human rights cases, because they had a Charter of Human Rights that's not unlike Victoria's one, they started looking at the preamble and started making decisions based on that sort of stuff. So I think it is dishonest to say that the preamble doesn't matter.
No. Every time someone says that, I say no. It's actually completely dishonest.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm just like, I can point to cases where this has actually happened.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just like you can't you're not even behaving in an honest manner to say, oh look, those cases don't matter. I'm sitting there going like, well, how do they not matter? Right? That is precedent now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that entire concept, but there's also the fact, tackling onto the other thing, removing the race powers. So one of the things they want to do is remove the race powers, which I agree with. Removing the race powers is a great idea. What I don't like is they recognized when all of the conservative columnists were like in approval to remove the race powers, they realized the biggest problem with that was that now all this Aboriginal welfare schemes that have been created would suddenly become unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Right? So they want to remove the race power, but then stick in basically something giving that exact same power, right? Just worded in a different way.
Yeah.
To which I'm sitting there and going, well, you're not changing anything.
Yeah.
Right? And not only...
Well, I think essentially it was worded in such a way as to sort of guarantee any welfare. So, I mean, theoretically, under the current provision, you could make things that negatively affect race. That is, I guess something like the dictation test from,
from the White Australia policy.
From White Australia policy. So, you can say we're going to treat other, non-whites in this particular way. So that's theoretically possible in the current wording.
Yeah,
the revised wording would essentially remove that sort of possibility, especially since they want to add in anti-discrimination type laws or stuff in the Constitution, but sort of essentially make a guarantee for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander based welfare.
Yeah, so basically they want to add 18C into the Constitution.
Yeah.
Which, to me, it's just like, well, look, the best this could possibly, the highest thing this could possibly achieve is to preserve whatever values we think are important today into the Constitution. And the funny thing is, you'll often hear, people on the people on the left side of the political spectrum talk about how the Constitution should be a living document and all of that. Yet, with this sort of recognized movement, they want to kill the Constitution, right? They're effectively wanting to put all of this stuff in and say, and we're setting the line here, right? And this is what everything means in relation to race in the Constitution, right? And it's just I just think in a way it stifles race relationships. Race relations in the country. In the sense that it now basically draws the line in the sand and says this is the way government should interpret race in the country, and it also simultaneously it's basically fighting a culture war. So, like that's what it is at its core. It's just
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think it also, it's clearly not inconsistent from our perspective as libertarians. It's not really that consistent with sort of limited power, limited government, restricting government's ability to kind of do stuff, making laws simpler, all that sort of stuff is we're just adding more complexity because there's going to be, all sorts of different cases and it also just gives government a bigger mandate to do stuff. And the problem is Section 51 is full of enough stuff as it is. Like you could pare out a whole lot of that stuff as it is rather than adding in more and then adding stuff in the preamble. So I think it's really, it's really counterproductive to reducing the size of government. And I think that's why it has a lot of strength in the political left because, that's what they want to do. They want to expand government, broadly speaking, and some on the right as well. There's lots of support for this kind of stuff in the Liberal Party.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So yeah, Tony Abbott being the biggest example of it. Like I think I don't think it's some sort of fig leaf to the Aboriginal community. Like I think he genuinely believes this is the right thing because he doesn't believe truly that government should be limited.
No, but there's one thing he did which I thought was the right thing to do. So he basically said, look, it needs, like, the wording for this needs to be decided by the Aboriginal community. And he got lambasted for that, which I found strange, because, like, he's not cancelling the recognised referendum.
No.
Right? He's not cancelling this. We will eventually have a say. What he's done is he said, well, look, it's not going to be a whole bunch of effectively politicians, people who aren't Aboriginals essentially deciding what Aboriginal recognition means, right? It's going to have to be Aboriginal leaders making that decision. And the criticism that he got for that made no sense to me. I was like, hang on, here's a guy actually giving Aboriginals more autonomy.
Yeah.
It seems to me that's a good thing.
Yeah. And it also ties in a bit with something like around the time of what I didn't realize about the Declaration of Independence was that in the years leading up to that, the Declaration, there was actually like 90 different organizations and individuals and newspapers and towns who made their own declarations of independence. So I think to sort of...
Oh, you're talking about the US one?
The US Declaration of Independence. Like, I think what you want with these sorts of changes is you actually want a proper grassroots support. Like, you actually want it to be coming up from the bottom up rather than from the top down. And so what I like about the notion of, Aboriginal... not just congresses, like, have... Northern Territory, Western Australia, let's have lots of different regional groupings, like working together to come up with something that they think people will actually go for. Like, I think that's a much better process than having just, politicians sitting down and nutting out.
Not just politicians, but like a bunch of academics.
Yeah, yeah,
It's really been like a bit of a project at the ANU's, what is it, like Aboriginal Studies.
yeah,
And, like if you look at the names on like, the recognized movement, it's just like, wow, there's some very big luminaries here. You know who's missing? Aboriginals.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, enough of Aboriginal policy has been dictated from the cities to the remote areas as it is. You don't need more of it at the constitutional level.
Yeah, and you know what? So the concern that's coming up over this is, oh, look, they won't agree on anything, or when they agree on something, it'll be something that not many people agree with, or whatever want to push. And I'm sitting there going like, look, this harks back to the whole Republic debate, right? Do you remember the Republic debate where the Republicans were just like, oh, the question should be, should we have a Republic or not? And I sat there going like, well, no. It's a constitution, right? And referendums are about writing what goes into the constitution. The discussion, the vote, is on the very specific words, not the intent of what we're going to put in the constitution. The words we're putting into the constitution, and words mean things, right? So whenever people go like, oh, that's how Howard killed the Republic debate, I went, no. What killed the Republic debate was the Republican movement, and I am a Republican, like notionally, for not putting up a cogent and, I guess you could say, convincing model for people to vote for. And I think if the recognized movement fails similarly, based on this, it is similarly a problem with the recognized movement not putting up a cogent response for people to vote on. But yes, it should be from the grassroots up. That there is no other way to do this.
Yep, absolutely. And that's also, not only do you get constitutional change, but you also get a change within the overall country and within the overall culture, because that's ultimately what you want. Like the thing about the preamble, which I have, one of the things I have a problem with, is that it doesn't change anything for anybody. Like, it doesn't change anybody's attitude. It doesn't change any legislation. It just becomes this thing that doesn't do anything. And we've already got plenty of that in the in the area of Aboriginal policy. Like, if it is a grassroots movement, then you will get change in attitudes across the country. And I think that's ultimately the thing that matters more than anything else. Because if you change the attitudes of people, politicians will follow that change, no matter what that change is, for the better or for the worse. So,
Speaking of change, there's a bit of a change going on in the Speaker's office.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Bronwyn Bishop. She was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. She got embroiled in a scandal over expenses and spending lots of taxpayer money on lots of frivolous things, and she has since resigned over the weekend. And now there is a race to the bottom to replace her, with every no-hoping politician putting up their hand for a $200,000 pay rise.
Give it to Clive, in my opinion. Clive Palmer. Honestly, Clive Palmer. It's like if Donald Trump was running Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
Just like, it's amazing. I think he would be really, really amusing. I think he'd be stupid.
If he showed up, that's the thing.
If he showed up, yeah. No, but I digress. This is, I guess you could say, long time coming. It's interesting. So some friends of mine were digging up quotes from her, like way back from like 1996, where she was talking about expenses, where she was talking about like the frivolity of government spending.
Yeah.
And someone was going on like, this one time where she quoted Hayek, and she's just like, she's a long time Hayekian, she's a small liberal, all of this other stuff. And I'm just there going like, and where was the small L liberal when, this helicopter, fight? I'm just like, even if you didn't know the price, okay? Even if you did not know the price, right? You can't. You're flying from Brisbane to. So this is the other part of the thing, right? She flew from Brisbane back to Melbourne, right? She'd been staying in Melbourne. She flew to Brisbane for some other event, and then she flew back to Melbourne just for this fundraiser.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there going like, look, if I tried to pull that shit off, right? On work, first of all, the person who's coordinating the expenses would sit there and go like, sorry, what are you doing back in Melbourne? What do you need to go back to Melbourne for? Right? And immediately at that point, it would have been cut off.
Yeah. I mean, I think what this also, I mean, what I've just realised, like, you know, because I was wondering, you know, what is the actual role of the speaker, and why would you want to be speaker? And I honestly can say there's almost the only reason there is to be the traffic cop in question time. I'm sure there's other theoretical roles, but really, you know, in the end, that's what they do. And I guess you see that in the quality of the people who are coming out. Like Philip Ruddock putting his hand up. I mean, this guy's like a dinosaur. He's like 400 years old. You know, it really is. It's not very becoming. It's funny, you know, the history of the speaker in the Commons was that, you know, the whole tradition of them being dragged to the seat is because they literally actually had to drag them in times gone past because, you know, the king used it as kind of a power play to remove people from the parliament. Well, you know, we could do a bit more of that these days. I think everybody's rushing to it a bit quickly. But, yeah, it's just disgraceful. Yeah. It just is. There's just there's nothing edifying about this in any way, shape or form. And
so there's
no dignity to be had for politicians in this.
Well, the thing is now there's stuff coming out about Tony Burke's expenses. Particularly, so I've mentioned this example before, right, where politicians like take their families along and stuff. So I think he spent something in 2012, right? I think he had his entire family come over for like a reunion fee in the middle of school holidays to like Uluru. And they said, oh, look, he was working in his capacity as an environment minister. And I'm sitting there going like, how long was it for? 4 days.
Yeah.
I'm just there going like, that's not how it works, right? In the private sector, your reunion thing occurs if you're staying out for more than 2 weeks, right? And I realize why politicians don't do this, because like this kind of business logic doesn't exist for politicians, because I can't think of many times where politicians spend 2 weeks in a place, right? No. Actually working, right?
Aside from Parliament.
Yeah, no, even then they fly back on the weekends.
Oh yeah, true, yeah.
Yeah. So, so the thing is they don't do it because they need to get to events and get their name out. Now, I'm just like, that's technically a parliament. That's kind of advertising for your party, and your party should pay that. So I came up with like I started thinking of like this thing, and I'm hoping basically some politician like who's listening to this podcast, David Leinhelm. No, I'm just hoping that someone sort of takes some of these suggestions and goes, well, you know what, this would be handy for some reform, because what Tony Abbott's done now is that he said there's going to be an inquiry. There was an inquiry in 2011. Yeah. People may not remember this, right? But there was an inquiry in 2011.
And I'm willing to bet that it was related to another bunch of people who got busted for misusing their expenses.
Correct.
And there will be one every single time it happens.
Correct. And that's exactly what happened. And some of the recommendations from that inquiry, I think it was like section 11 or something like that. I had it open yesterday, and I was going to rant about it. But hang on, I'll fix that up later. Like when we edit this, I'll post the thing. I'll post the link to it. But basically, the thing said there are poor definitions for what constitutes official business, for what constitutes party business, for what constitutes publicity, right, and all of those things. So I think one of the first what I would seriously do, if I was reforming the system. First things first. As soon as you register with the AEC, right, the AEC will open up a bank account for you. Wherever the fuck, I don't care, right? All of your expenses, any valid expenses or anything you want to claim, anything people want to claim tax deductions on, anything like that, has to be to that bank account, right? And it's a bank account that the AEC can monitor, right? So now if I, as someone who wants to donate to a political party, wants to donate and wants to claim, tax deductibility, right? I have to put it into that bank account, right? And that is the only way you can claim a tax deduction. So that immediately creates this black hole for all the monies that the parties get. The next thing I would do is basically treat parliamentarian travel as work to work between their electorate office and Canberra. That I would not bother with anything, right? I would just say that is legitimate travel. You're allowed to do that anytime there's a sitting week, right? So like you're allowed a trip to and from that anytime, and it's considered within a sitting week. Now, pretend if they have to go, the only exception I make for this is the Prime Minister. As far as I'm concerned, the Prime Minister can do whatever the fuck they want, right? Because the Prime Minister is the ultimate, he has the ultimate say-so and everything. right? And I figure only the public can sort of, hold the Prime Minister's account. But every other minister, right? If they want to go and open something up, say a hospital or whatever, if they want to go to a school, if they want to do some community outreach or something like that, if they want to claim it back as an expense, it has to come either from the budget of that project. So, like, say if a school is doing something, they'll budget into it, there's going to be a minister traveling here and it costs this much, and it's going to feed into their media budget, which will mean that projects will obviously have to be inflated slightly to now account for that, or they pay out of that account that I mentioned, right? And basically that comes out of the party's funding and not out of the public purse. Or rather, it comes out of the public's funding, but like we're already funding the parties anyway.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like now, and someone pointed out this will mean like politicians will travel less, and I said, well, no, they can keep traveling as much as they want. It'll just mean they have less of an ad budget.
Yeah.
Right? And I said, like, which is fine by me. I want to see less political ads. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, it's very valid points, and I guess we'll have to finish on that because we've run out of time. So, yeah, that's been episode 20, and we'll be back again next week, hopefully with a full complement of people not dropping out because of internet issues.
I blame the NBN.
Yeah.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye.